Welcome back to Watch the Bookerman and to episode number 20 of Paul Heyman's TNA 2010. It's a nice little milestone, the 20th episode. We also had 10 episodes in the previous series, so that's actually 30 shows now that I've booked with TNA, which I'm happy with. Of course, we want to keep the consistency and the momentum going. The fact that we're now in the build to Slammiversary, albeit with sacrifice in between, is getting me more in the mood to keep booking this, and hopefully we can keep up a decent schedule as we build to that probably second biggest pay-per-view of the year. I'm really looking forward to what I've got planned for Slammiversary, and we begin this show with some action, albeit footage captured earlier today, with Mauro and Taz talking over it, telling viewers that we had to start with this. It's an incident backstage. The footage sees Desmond Wolfe and Jeff Hardy brawling, the fight having apparently broke out as soon as Wolfe entered the building. Jeff Hardy had been waiting for him. He, of course, missed last week's show in the aftermath of Lethal Lockdown. Their rivalry has been raging since the very first show of the Paul Heyman era, and Wolfe took the time last week to gloat about being the only team captain left standing. While the two were kept apart, Desmond Wolfe was then set upon by Samoa Joe, so really a chaotic feel we want to kick off the show. This is sort of I find the second episode after a pay-per-view perhaps to be a little bit of a lull. Maybe I shouldn't say that. People might turn off now because of that, but I do think this is a decent episode. But I think the one after a pay-per-view is always huge. The two before are sort of the really hitting home the build to the pay-per-view, whereas the second one, there is a little bit of, I suppose this is where you should develop the stories in terms of getting a bit more depth to the stories. The last two is where the action will happen. The first one is where all the reaction happens from the pay-per-view, so this is an important one for getting across the stories that you want to tell, I suppose. And after seeing that chaos, many people in the back pulling these two sides apart, Mauro and Taz do appear on screen finally. They're hyped up by what they've witnessed. We want them to push the viewers to feel even more amped up about the fact that tonight in the main event, these three guys will all be fighting when Jeff Hardy and Samoa Joe team up against Desmond Wolfe and a partner of his choosing, anybody from the TNA roster. A good start to the show, a 73 rating, and gaining heat to the Desmond Wolfe v Jeff Hardy brackets and Samoa Joe storyline. And we move then into the first match of the night. It is Matt Morgan versus Jay Lethal, and Matt Morgan actually defeats Jay Lethal. Might seem a little bit counterintuitive. Jay Lethal had his big breakout moment last week challenging Abyss, but it is a screwy finish. Jay Lethal is actually taking the legs out from Matt Morgan. That's the whole story of the match. The big tree of Matt Morgan being chopped down throughout the match by Jay Lethal. Eventually Lethal looks to actually be in control and goes up to the top, having taken Matt Morgan down for the macho elbow, but Daniels comes out, pushes him from the turnbuckle into the guardrail, throat first, so badly hurting Jay Lethal. The referee doesn't see it because Kazarian is also there distracting the referee. The referee has no choice but to count the 10, and it is another victory for those Bad Influence members, namely Matt Morgan here. A 61 from Morgan, a 55 from Jay Lethal, continuing the Bad Influences storyline, getting the crowd hotter, and it is a decent way to kick off the show. Happy with that as we go into the post-match segment. Like I said, Jay Lethal out at ringside and Bad Influence enter the ring with Daniels taking a microphone. He says that since lockdown, the question has been why. Why did Matt Morgan do what he did? Daniels mocks people who think that Matt Morgan's actions were a betrayal and says that there's nothing wrong with cashing in and taking a more lucrative offer. Daniels says that after the success of his interview with Kazarian, he's going to conduct a live in-the-ring interview. He makes this sound like the best thing ever, as they are going to lay out the blueprint of Bad Influence's grand vision. Their plan is scuppered, however, by the emergence of Abyss. We're told that it was revealed earlier this week that the attack on Abyss before lockdown was carried out by Matt Morgan, who then went on to feign concern for the big man. So I don't know if you remember that promo between Matt Morgan, Daniels and Kazarian the other week, but the idea is that that was a setup. Morgan already knew what he was going to do. Abyss is ready to fight them, but he's outnumbered 3-1, and Bad Influence obviously confident after the events of the last couple of weeks. They fancy their chances against Abyss until Hernandez comes down to back up the global champion. The two big men are ready to fight, and even with the man advantage, Bad Influence aren't quite as confident anymore. They leave the ring backing away. Abyss and Hernandez seemingly found a common enemy. They sort of go face to face, not friends or anything, but there is an understanding that they are going to have to work together to fight off the threat of Bad Influence. Daniel's doing a good job of improvising. It's an okay segment, again advancing that storyline as we go into a backstage segment Kurt Angle shown storming through the back. He is furious. The ending of the show last week, of course, saw Mr. Anderson drive him face first into the World Heavyweight Championship with a mic drop. He has stitches in his head, still feeling the effects of that, and like Joe and Hardy earlier, he is out for revenge. Before he can find the man who he will face at Sacrifice, Angle is stopped in his tracks by Paul Heyman, who doesn't want there to be another incident in the back. The security have already been worked hard enough as it is. Paul instead suggests that Kurt Angle goes to the ring and calls out Mr. Anderson. If they have a score to settle before Sacrifice, they can at least sort out their issues in the ring. Put lockdown there by mistake. Still thinking about the previous pay-per-view, but it is Sacrifice where Kurt Angle and Mr. Anderson will face for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. Both men improvising well in their back and forth in this segment, and it's a 73 rating, so again, pretty happy with that. Perhaps, again, you'd want more from Paul Heyman and Kurt Angle, but these 2-minute backstage segments are never going to blow anything away. That's why, probably on the go-home show, we'll need sort of an 8-minute promo segment between Kurt Angle and Mr. Anderson. It might not necessarily have to be that long, but I think if we do a segment on the go-home show or the episode before that is rated on both men's entertainment, we'll definitely see improvements in the heat of the storyline, and that is a key thing going into these main events of pay-per-views, and we'll see how things develop over the next couple of weeks. A 51 rated match. This is pretty good actually. ODB, Taylor Wilde and Sarita probably carrying the match. Madison Rayne doing okay as well, and Lacey is actually decent in this despite seeming off her game. Madison Rayne continuing to hint at a face turn, but Madison Rayne, who said she wanted nothing to do with Lacey Von Erich last week, has actually been put in a match teaming with them, so she's kind of reluctant throughout the match, and to be honest, isn't a very good partner to Lacey and Brooke, who of course need all the help they can get against ODB, Sarita and Taylor Wilde. It is Taylor Wilde, Sarita and ODB who pick up the win. Taylor pinning Lacey Von Erich following a missile dropkick. Brooke the weak link, but we are accepting that she's a rookie and that she's probably not going to win many matches as we try and develop her, improve her skills, and I think putting her with Lacey, neither of them are that great in the ring, but they'll have an appeal, and I can see them becoming a decent knockouts tag team. I say decent in terms of more filling up a roster space rather than actually putting on any great matches. And following the match and the celebrations of the victors, Brooke then enters the ring to check on Lacey Von Erich, paying back the fact that she's had her back since she came to the company. Lacey is hurt, but she's fine, and begins to tell Brooke that she did a really good job in the match. You can tell that she's not taking to heart the defeat, she's brushing it off straight away, and Madison Rayne looks on the apron. She's not getting in the ring, but she doesn't like what she's seeing. They're laughing and smiling and joking, and they're really encouraged by the fact that they put up a decent fight in this 6-women's tag team match, whereas Madison Rayne, of course, has higher ambitions than that, and she walks off, already unhappy that she had to team with them. She looks even more sure in her decision. She wants nothing to do with Lacey Von Erich. She says a few words as she leaves, because I did rate her on entertainment in this segment just to try and make it a bit better. I probably should have scripted that because she didn't improvise well at all, and it is another poor segment. Thankfully, it doesn't advance any storyline because it probably would have lost heat. It should do, but I'm not sure why. I think it might be because Lacey and Madison are aligned, so they're not seen as being on two separate sides of the storyline. So I need to get rid of that link between them for the next episode. We then head backstage and we once again see Alyssa Flash and Jimmy Jacobs. They spoke last week and it's still the same issue really. Jimmy Jacobs wants her in the New Age, but the internal politics of the group is delaying her being added to the group. This is almost everything that Jimmy Jacobs set out against. He was talking about a new way of doing things in wrestling, but the same old issues seem to be cropping up, but he promises he's doing everything that he can. This isn't as good of a segment as last week's because the two people who were rated on their entertainment both struggle when going off script, so we saw how good it was last week, that it was in the 50s and it was gaining heat. We're now sort of back to square one, possibly a sign that we should play it safe here really, not go off script. We'll probably get mid-40 ratings, which I'd be happy with at this point. As Jacobs continues to speak to Alyssa Flash and he's trying to reassure her, Kong and Hamada enter the locker room. They say nothing, but both look at Jimmy Jacobs and he knows this is his time to make his excuses and leave. He tells Flash to leave it with him. He's going to talk with the Knockouts Tag Team Champions, and he's sure that everybody can get on the same page eventually. He's trying to play both sides here. He wants Kong and Hamada, obviously, because they're the only two people who have actually officially aligned with him yet, and they've got the Knockouts Tag Team titles, two very talented wrestlers, but he does want to add Alicia Flash to the ranks, which doesn't seem to be sitting well with those two women. Kurt Angle then comes down to the ring. He's looking to call out Mr. Anderson, as Paul Heyman had suggested to him earlier. However, as he makes his way to the ring, he is attacked by a steel pipe-wielding Homicide. We're surprised by this development, Maro and Taz are too. It's a sneak attack that seemingly has no reason, and Homicide does take Angle down, but the World Heavyweight Champion begins to fight back, of course. I don't think it'd be a good look for Homicide to be convincingly beating down Kurt Angle. At this point, Rob Terry comes down, so we're implying or certainly suggesting that there's some sort of link between Anderson and Homicide. Did Homicide get put up to this by Mr. Anderson? And Kurt begins to be overwhelmed by the numbers. Thankfully for him, D'Angelo Dinero is on hand to run down to make the save and looks to clear Homicide and Terry off. They do retreat a little bit, but as they leave, Homicide swings a glancing blow to the ribs of the Pope with the steel pipe, causing him to drop down to a knee. He's holding his ribs, of course, in severe pain from the steel pipe. While they could take advantage, Homicide and Terry decide to retreat to the back. This was more, I think, about sending a message to Kurt Angle and in turn D'Angelo Dinero, rather than actually beating him down and taking him out. Kurt Angle wanted to call out Mr. Anderson, but ended up getting attacked by two people who are seemingly doing his bidding. Perhaps Mr. Anderson is paying Homicide to do this, perhaps Homicide was just trying to bait D'Angelo Dinero out. We don't know as of yet, but of course things will develop. Advancing the storyline, not losing heat to it. Luckily, Kurt Angle looking good, and we did get the crowd hotter with this segment, but it is only a 64, and like I said, we will need better angles in the next couple of weeks to bring that storyline up ahead of Mr. Anderson versus Kurt Angle, which I think will be a very good main event to the pay-per-view. We then get the third match of the night, and it seems a bit weird just throwing this match on there, but we would have been talking about it through the night and promoting it, of course. All the little inserts from the commentators, the sort of hype of what's coming, that would have built up this match, albeit we probably should have announced it last week. Nonetheless, this is officially a number one contenders match, and the Hooligans are able to defeat the Motor City Machine Guns. It's a good tag team match. I'd argue that this is a pay-per-view worthy match, but Brian Kendrick does roll up Chris Sabin for the victory. It was a great, I rate it on high spots? Yes, so it was a high spots and an all-out match. I did think about changing it to Steal the Show, but then I was going to do the main event as Steal the Show, but then I think I've just done the main event as storytelling, so perhaps a missed opportunity to get an even better match. But of course, there will be time for the Hooligans and Motor City Machine Guns to go one-on-one, perhaps on pay-per-views in the future, and perhaps for the World Tag Team titles. But the point is that it's a very competitive match, the two teams evenly matched, and it's just London and Kendrick's willingness to slightly bend the rules with a handful of tights that does give them the victory in the end. Following their win, the Hooligans are joined in the ring by Jeremy Borash, who interviews the new number one contenders to the World Tag Team titles. Beer Money remain at ringside, and the Hooligans direct their promo straight at James Storm and Robert Roode, endearing themselves to the fans somewhat. Despite what they'd just done in the previous match, they show a little bit of respect to Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin. To be fair, they're saying that it was a high level of competition. They are a great tag team, but they just have different philosophies. London and Kendrick and the Machine Guns are both talented, but they're different people. Beer Money, on the other hand, they suck. So of course these two teams will be facing at Sacrifice, and they're both heels, so I thought you've kind of got to make one of them at least a little bit likeable. So the idea here is that perhaps people who thought that Brian Kendrick and Paul London were total dicks so far, perhaps they'll just see them as guys who just run down everybody. That's what they do. They insult the tag team champions who are selling shock at what's being said. From what I've seen on London and Kendrick shoots, they have got a sharp tongue. They're good at insulting people. They came across as quite negative people, albeit in a very, very entertaining way. They weren't happy with their time in WWE, and I think they can bring some of that bitterness to the characters here in TNA and direct it at Robert Roode and James Storm, who they will face. They call them the Feast or Fire champions. They didn't deserve the titles in the first place, and at Sacrifice, their joke of a title reign will come to an end. James Storm and Robert Roode are understandably furious at this and look set to enter the ring. They decide against it, however, and head up the ramp. Returning to the second hour of the show, we get a segment which sets up our main event. Desmond Wolfe approaching Daniels in the back as the leader of Bad Influence is seen talking with Kazarian and Matt Morgan. Wolfe tries to schmooze with Daniels before asking him to be his partner in the main event. Daniels points out that they tried this before and it didn't end so well. This happened early on, I think it was in the first month of the save actually. Daniels and Wolfe teamed together, and then Wolfe kind of abandoned Daniels after the match. This was when Daniels was feuding with Samoa Joe and Wolfe just wanted none of that. Wolfe says it'll be different this time, and he promises that when Daniels needs a favour, he'll be there. It's clear that Wolfe now sees them as more of a cohesive unit. Previously, he used them really when it was Tomko, Kazarian and Daniels, or was it just Daniels and Tomko actually, which was fair enough really to not see much use in them. But now that we've seen Bad Influence as this three-pronged attack of Daniels, Kazarian and Morgan, all bringing different things to the table. He sees them as much more valuable, and as a result he's much more pleasant to them as he tries to get this partnership. Daniels looks to Kazarian and Morgan and they all seem happy. He's convinced he will team with Wolfe tonight to send a message in the main event of Impact. In his mind, Daniels wants to be able to stand tall at the end of the show to prove just how good this new group is. Desmond leaves the locker room looking to Kazarian and Morgan and telling them that they are more than welcome to join them at ringside in the main event. He thinks that there is strength in numbers, and certainly that appeared to have been the case in recent weeks with Bad Influence. A decent match now, but subpar wrestling apparently, which... Look at the 4 people in this match: Amazing Red, Austin Creed, Kazuchika Okada and Roderick Strong. I find that very difficult to believe. Okada again not doing particularly well. Creed also a little bit below where we'd want him. But Red and Strong both doing well. It is actually Roderick Strong who picks up the victory against Austin Creed with a sick kick. I don't think that description is fair in any way at all. But Strong also getting better at his gimmick, which is very, very good to see. After the match, the victors stand tall, Okada and Strong celebrating their win over Amazing Red and Austin Creed. Before they leave, however, Strong takes a microphone and decides that now is the best time to address something that's been on his mind. He says that he's been hearing recently from Kazarian that he's beaten every possible contender in the X Division, and looking around, Roddy thinks he's actually right. For that reason, Strong reckons it's time for some new blood to enter the X Division as he officially challenges Kazarian to face him at Sacrifice with the X Division title on the line. This comes somewhat out of the blue. Okada wasn't expecting this. Nonetheless, the two men leave together, an official challenge laid down by Roderick Strong. He wants Kazarian at Sacrifice, and I think that Strong would be a really good addition to the X Division. He brings something different to the division, a more technical approach, and I think that he'll be a great person to add to this relatively stale X Division, I would say. It's those same names popping up again and again who Kazarian has had to face, and now this is someone different, and that match will take place at Sacrifice, but there will be obstacles in Strong's way before that match is officially announced. Angelina Love is then interviewed in the back by Lauren Brooke ahead of Velvet Sky's match with Roxy that's up next. Love takes the time to complain about Lacey Von Eric's empty head being the only thing that came between her and the Knockouts Championship at Lockdown. Of course, Velvet Sky pushed Lacey Von Eric into the steel cage door, which in turn caused it to slam in the face of Angelina Love. That led to her being hit with a widow's peak, and Angelina Love reminds Velvet Sky that she's promised to make it up to her. Again, even with her best friend, Angelina Love has this very manipulative streak that she is not letting Velvet Sky forget that she played some part in her losing at Lockdown. That's just the kind of person that she is. Velvet mocks Madison Rayne, who sided with Lacey, only to quickly realise that they were right all along. Velvet says that it's too late for Rayne to go back on her mistake, so she'll just have to do what she did before she was discovered by Angelina Love and Velvet Sky, and that is fade back to obscurity. Madison Rayne then confronts the beautiful people during the interview. She's heard enough, completely blanking Velvet Sky, who was the one who directed it towards her. Instead, she tells Angelina Love she doesn't care about the tittle-tattle at the minute. She just wants to talk to Angelina Love, because if Angelina Love wants another shot at Tara, Madison Rayne says that she'll have to go through her. So it's not a great segment of 46, pretty average. Sets up the fact that Angelina Love and Madison Rayne are both in the hunt for the Knockouts title. Their win-loss records haven't been particularly good recently, but we've not got that much depth in the division, and I think that Angelina Love and Madison Rayne will be able to have a decent match, and whoever goes on to face Tara, whether it's a rematch with, well, both would be rematches, but Angelina Love had the match at Lockdown, whereas this would be Madison Rayne's first Knockouts Championship shot. I'm not sure if she'd had one previous to this, actually. Pretty sure she's not held the belt at this point, but we do want to establish her at least as a contender, and we'll see how things go between those two. I think I'm going to have them two face off one-on-one next week. After Maro and Taz promote what is to come on the night, they also introduce the next segment, a sent-in promo from the British Invasion, which again isn't great. Doug Williams not doing well when improvising dialogue. I really should have scripted this. It's something that oftentimes I just forget to do. I prefer to let people improvise and see how they do, but in cases like this where it is clearly a pre-recorded promo, definitely should be scripting it really. But this is about them being stranded in the UK for the past few weeks. I said at Lockdown that this was around the time when there was that huge Icelandic volcano eruption, and I probably, if I was using British Invasion and in the midst of a storyline, I probably would have ignored it. It probably wouldn't have even crossed my mind, but it's a good excuse for why they haven't really been on TV. And we see Brutus Magnus and Douglas Williams shown in London, England, and they cut a promo about how they haven't been able to travel to the United States recently. We're playing this into the storyline. Luckily for them, they've been in the greatest nation on earth, the United Kingdom. They add that it's given them time to think about things. It's given them a chance to take stock of their place in TNA. Williams tells the viewers that they're British, and while British are the world leaders in many things, he and Magnus became followers of Eric Young's World Elite. They wanted to use that as a stepping stone, but the true elite, particularly in professional wrestling, is and always has been the British. Magnus says that they will be back in TNA soon, and they are going to finally teach the ignorant Americans and the rest of the world that Britain is the gold standard of this business. So not the gold standard based on the ratings that they're getting, but we do want to reintroduce British Invasion after the fact that they've just been part of the Ultimate Jobber Stable World Elite. Absolutely terribly booked they were by me in these first few months, and we really do need to bring back their characters, and we're just leaning into the fact they're British. Of course, foreign heel isn't a particularly groundbreaking or even an interesting character to give these guys, but I think they're a decent tag team, and the fact that they're going to have this arrogant superiority that their way of wrestling is somehow better and more pure and more true to the art form than anybody else, I think could lead to some interesting rivalries. They are both really talented, albeit in different ways. Magnus had a lot of character and carried himself quite well, whereas Doug Williams was very much about the in-ring stuff. Magnus should probably be carrying the load in terms of promos for these guys. But we go into the fifth match of the night, and Velvet Sky picks up a fairly one-sided victory over Roxy. Decisive in 5 minutes, both women do get some offense in, but the double knee backbreaker is enough for Velvet Sky to pick up the win. That's a good rating for her. Lacey Von Erich at ringside, I need to remember to take things like this off because it's been so many weeks since they weren't together, but Lacey actually helping the match, so probably getting a bit of a boost from that, which isn't really fair, and it is a terrible match. I've only just noticed that that's a 29 somehow, because two decent performances really. I don't know what particularly I've done wrong there. Low experience, poor gimmick. Yeah, so it's just a few different little things, and it's a short match with two not that great performances. After the match, Angelina Love and Velvet Sky stand tall, but don't seem to be done with Roxy after the bell. While there's no sort of post-match attack, the two women are agitating Roxy and still just being bullies like they are, and they won't let her leave the ring. Roxy then grows frustrated and she starts lashing out, which then means that they're going to retaliate. However, Tara comes down and this sort of dispels the situation as Love and Sky leave the ring. Tara checks on Roxy before getting a microphone and telling Love that she is more than happy to face her anytime. The Beautiful People soap opera lockdown detracted from what should have been a great one-on-one match between them, and if she vows that Velvet Sky will be barred from ringside, then Tara is more than happy to face Angelina Love. So Madison Rayne putting herself into contention, Tara pretty quickly taking her out. If Love is willing to have this match with Velvet Sky barred from ringside, it will be Tara and Angelina Love. Of course, Madison Rayne, who has been struggling to find her place in the locker room, will feel even worse. Tara working the crowd well, improvising in what is still a poor segment. She did her best, but it was rated on the other three girls' overness as well, so it was never going to be a great segment. We then return from the break into the final half hour of the show, and Jeff Hardy and Samoa Joe are shown in the back discussing the upcoming main event that they'll both be in. Samoa Joe says that he knows all about Daniels, but both men are very wary of the bad influence effect. They agree that they'll have to be on top of their game tonight if they are to walk out victorious over Wolfe and Daniels. I unscripted this because it was supposed to be just a laid back segment. It wasn't supposed to advance anything particularly, although it does. Jeff Hardy unfortunately struggling when going off script, Joe doing well, and this is just one of them things that a small segment that's just inserted to remind you that the main event is coming and hopefully keep people interested for Jeff Hardy and Samoa Joe versus Desmond Wolfe and Daniels. Heading back to the ring, Mr. Anderson comes out and is joined by his muscle Rob Terry. Anderson says that Paul Heyman has ensured that security are on high alert right now because what he is about to say about Sacrifice's main event is of the utmost importance and the people need to listen. So we're getting a sense of arrogance from Anderson now. He's the number one contender, and despite there being quite a lot of green, this isn't a particularly good segment. Does lose heat to the World Heavyweight Championship storyline. Mr. Anderson goes on to cut a promo addressing his intentions if he is to become the TNA World Heavyweight Champion, and he says that the way things have been done has only brought them so far, and he's here to take them to that next level. The first is the ring, and as champion, Mr. Anderson would change this playpen 6 sides to a traditional 4-sided ring. That is where wrestling should be competed, and he's gonna change that immediately. Of course, Hulk Hogan and Bischoff did that in real life. We're kind of playing on that despite it never happening in this timeline, but the idea is that Mr. Anderson is trying to strip away the identity of TNA, hopefully to the negative reaction of the crowd, as he then moves on to the X division. No limits, that means there's no need for it. A division with no limits makes no sense. He's tearing apart the X division, and he says that the solution is to scrap the X division and to get all that flippy crap off his television. And while he's at it, he'd fire Shark Boy. He shared a ring with that guy a couple of months ago and he sucked. Anderson continues with his promo, just trying however he can. It's an unscripted promo to wind up the Impact Zone fans. Hopefully those 3 points, getting rid of the 6 sides, the X Division and Shark Boy, will annoy people, and it's just Mr. Anderson being a dick. He knows he doesn't have the power to make these changes. If he's the world champion, he doesn't suddenly become the guy who runs the company. But he's just saying that he's going to use his influence as World Heavyweight Champion to make things difficult for other people. And moreover, he just enjoys winding up the Impact Zone fans. Between that segment and the main event, we get another segment that is supposed to advance the World Heavyweight Championship storyline, but does lose heat to it again. A 61, Anderson and Lashley not delivering on the night really as we'd want them to. Like I said, we're going to really need Kurt Angle maybe to carry the segments in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully that will lead to the storyline getting a little bit hotter going into Sacrifice. Bobby Lashley is Mike Tenay's guest for a sit-down interview. The recently returned dual sport star, he's got a laid-back posture, but the expression on his face is clearly designed to intimidate Tenay. He's saying that he's calm right now, but things could change. He's making it clear throughout his body language, the way he speaks. He is in charge of how this interview goes. During the discussion, he guarantees 100% that AJ Styles will not be at Sacrifice, but Bobby Lashley will be. Bobby will come out after Kurt Angle beats Mr. Anderson, and he will wait for the referee to declare him the winner by default. After that, the Slammiversary main event will be set. He's still just as sure that it's going to be him versus Angle, and the next World Heavyweight Champion is going to take out the Olympic gold medalist at TNA's anniversary event. It's not going to be a celebration of everything Kurt Angle's done. Those 5 times as World Heavyweight Champion won't mean anything when he's in the ring with the baddest man in the business. Mike Tenay again tries to present the alternative, AJ Styles appearing at Sacrifice or Mr. Anderson winning the title at that event, but Lashley is just not having it. He is so hard-headed, single-minded. They can make the promotional material right now as far as he is concerned, because it will be Bobby Lashley and Kurt Angle in the main event of Slammiversary, and like he's already said, there will be a new world champion. Lashley making his point very directly there, and Mike Tenay does say that he'll be at the home of AJ Styles next week to interview the man who is scheduled to face Bobby Lashley in a number 1 contendership match at Sacrifice. Lashley laughs as Mike Tenay suggests that it's even a possibility he'll be at the match. Mike Tenay saying that AJ Styles is not in a condition to be here tonight, but he can't wait to hear what the Phenomenal One has to say from his home next week. We then go into that main event, and it's a decent main event. Unfortunately, Desmond Wolfe was off his game. He seems pretty inconsistent, actually, in this mod. All around a similar rating, and you can see where the 74 comes from. A 73 from Desmond Wolfe, a 70 from Daniels, 73 from Samoa Joe, and Jeff Hardy, just about the standout performer. A match that had fantastic heat and great wrestling, and it's a little bit of a scurry finish, it has to be said. Kazarian and Matt Morgan are at ringside. It's that sense that something could happen, but nothing has, so there's no real justification for anybody to come out. This changes at the end of the match. Kazarian on the outside, him and Daniel sort of double team Jeff Hardy while the referee is distracted by Matt Morgan. Jeff Hardy takes a dive from the top rope to the outside, taking down the 2 men, but it does leave him unable to help Samoa Joe as Desmond Wolfe goes for a Tower of London. Of course, Joe, distracted by the presence of Kazarian, is then taken down by Wolfe, set up for a Tower of London. Joe, however, goes for the Coquina clutch and looks to reverse the attempted Tower of London, but while the referee is distracted by Jeff Hardy, Daniels and Kazarian on the other side of the ring, obviously that dive just happens. It's taken me a while to explain this, but in reality it'd be the dive from Jeff Hardy, and then while the referee's looking at that, Morgan comes in and hits a big boot to the head of Samoa Joe, basically a carbon footprint on the apron, and that dazes Samoa Joe enough that Wolfe can hit the Tower of London and pin Samoa Joe for the 1, 2, 3. So it's a very screwy finish, a little bit convoluted, but it would have been fairly straightforward as it played out on the screen. But yeah, it's a tainted finish. We're keeping the faces strong, but Desmond Wolfe and Daniels picking up a victory, and nobody comes out after the main event really. It's just a case of Desmond Wolfe with Daniels, Kazarian and Morgan Last time that they teamed together, it didn't go so well, but now Morgan's there, there's certainly a more credible threat than when Tomko had been in the group, and Desmond Wolfe appears to be unified with Bad Influence. It's not necessarily that he's part of the stable. Whether that will continue, they've of course got a couple of common enemies, and the four of them stood tall together to end Impact. This is another establishing week for the Bad Influence stable. Of course, they came together at Lockdown, and I'm really trying to make them look like a threat. And if last week's victory over Hernandez and the Motor City Machine Guns had been an opening statement, the end of this week's episode of Impact solidified the threat of Bad Influence and Desmond Wolfe's reputation as one of the most cerebral operators in pro wrestling. He knew that Daniels was a good pick to be his tag team partner, and it's paid dividends tonight as they win the main event and stand tall in what is a decent episode. Of course, last week raised the bar a little bit, so it is worse than that, but I think looking at what I've booked on this week's show, it's fair enough. We went big for the post-lockdown show. Like I said, this is a little bit of a lull. Not that I've not tried to book a good show, but when you compare it to our ratings previously, before we changed to the regular focus, our best shows had been the pay-per-views, which were 71. So we get in on an average episode of Impact what would have been a very, very strong rating previously. So I'm happy with that. The company's definitely moving in the right direction as we continue the build to the pay-per-view. Jeff Jarrett thinks that Angelina Love is too small. Stupid opinion, Jeff. That's the rating for the previous week's show. We won't get the ratings for this until the next Thursday, so I can't say whether it's been a success again, but I think it is our second, well, it'd be our joint second best show so far. Fifth it is actually, which shows we've had 3 very, very good pay-per-views. So disappointed to see Lockdown there in 9th. Happy with that show, and we continue to build to Sacrifice. We've got the 2 big main events, and next week we will hear for the first time since Lockdown, 3 weeks in the making, AJ Styles will speak to Mike Tenay about his current condition and the chances of him competing at Sacrifice.